elections as being something that is on people's minds. And I'm not sure how it is in Singapore, but in the US it's a really big topic. How do you feel about the elections? Not that you, I mean, it's an interesting one because I found that there's one topic that you got to be so careful about, because there's always somebody with a different opinion, and it is triggering some very strong emotions. You know, I had a cruise. I went on a cruise a few weeks ago in Costa Rica with some families, and there were like 9 families. And the person who organized the cruise got everybody together just as we boarded, and he kind of said there are 2 rules on this boat. Number 1, no whining. You can complain that, hey, the ice is not cold enough. No, you're not complaining about anything. And number 2, no politics, which has worked out really well. But the thing is that why no politics? Because politics is deeply emotional. And you talked about the heart. It touches our hearts. It touches our deeply held beliefs, our core identity as individuals, and that's why it's so impactful in the way that we see the world. And what I've learned is that as an investor, it is so good to acknowledge the heart, the emotions, but also to be very pragmatic in the way that you make decisions about your money and make those decisions based on data and evidence. So what I want to do is kind of come back and share with you, what does the data and evidence look like when you look at elections? Would you say that people are nervous about the election, that's adding additional uncertainty on top of the Iran issue, on top of Ukraine, on top of all the stuff? Oh, we got another crazy nut going out there. Would you say that it adds uncertainty to the market anytime there's an election? Yeah, that's what it seems like. So let's look at data. We have about 100 years of good data in the US, in the S&P 500. And in the course of these 100 years or so of data, in the US, we have had 24 different presidential elections. 24 elections. So we know that historically about 1 in 4 years the market goes down, 3 in 4 it goes up. The question is, if you look at these election years, when we know there's an additional uncertainty on the market, that we don't know what the election is going to look like, do you think that that split is any different? Do you think that you would have more years of negative outcomes because of the additional uncertainty? What's your feel on that? Probably, yeah, right? That's most people would say, yeah, it's kind of nerve-wracking, it's more uncertainty. Well, it turns out that if you look at the data, what you find is that about 4 years out of the 24, the market went down, but the overwhelming majority of the years, the market went up. People are incredibly concerned about being an election year. When you look at the data, is there evidence to say that you should be terribly concerned about the market in an election year? Should you? Based on data? I don't think so. And in fact, if you look at the 4 years when the market dropped, the first one was in 1932. So you had a market drop in an election year. And people can say, well, look, that wasn't good for the market. What else happened in 1932? I'm sorry? The Great Depression. What might have mattered more to the market? The election or the Great Depression? You tell me. 8 years later, in 1940, another election, another market drop. But what happened in 1939 in September? Germany invaded Poland, and we had World War II. And then it took 60 years until Bush versus Gore in 2000 when we had a market drop. And you remember the pictures of, there was an older gentleman looking through a little piece of paper with a hole, they call it Chad, to identify if there was a vote for one party or not. Remember that, those pictures of the the person with the big, it was kind of fun. But we had the negative year. Now it turns out there was also the year when the dot-com bust started to happen. All the technology starting to crash. So yeah, we had the election, but also the dot-com crash. What might have mattered more for the market? And the last one was Obama versus McCain 2008, and that was the GFC. So when you look at the data, is there evidence to say that being an election year should make you nervous as an investor? Not really. Even the 4 years when the market did drop, there was something a lot bigger going on. But it's about the politics and presidents. And so many folks wanted to know, having a Republican or a Democrat, what should I do with my money? Should I make a move because of one party or one president, one policy, one set of policies or another? And I didn't want to go 100 years because that's too long. We would have been here all night. But rather what I did is I looked in my lifetime. I'm born in 1969. I'm about to be 55, and I wanted to know, how did the market do during different presidents in my lifetime? So that goes back to Richard Nixon. So if I were to ask you, that's about a 10% per year return. If I were to ask you, among the presidents that you might be familiar with, which one do you think had the market went up the most? Which president had the highest returns in the market during their time in office? Who? Reagan? Trump? Trump? Another Trump? Okay, let's go the other one. Who had the lowest? Who? Reagan? You can. Oh no, maybe I misheard. Well, it turns out that suspense is killing everybody, so let's go through the numbers. When I was born, President Nixon was in office, and during the 5.5 years or so that he was in office, the market, in fact, did not go up on average per year while he was in the office, in the White House. It went down by about 2.9% per year on average. And then he gets out of there, and then for 3.5 years or so, President Ford comes in, Jerry Ford, and the market skyrockets at 20+% per year. And in 1977, President Carter, a Democrat, gets elected, and for 4 years, the market on average goes up by about 11%. He's there for 4 years, and then President Reagan gets elected, and on average, during the 8 years that Reagan was in office, the market goes up by 15.8%, which is a nice number. And then his vice president gets in there for 4 years only, George H.W. Bush. The market goes up nicely, 13.9. And then Bill Clinton comes along, and the market for 8 years on average goes up by a really nice 17.6%. And then there's Bush versus Gore. President George W. Bush gets elected. He's there for 8 years. And on average, during the 8 years of the George W. Bush years, the market goes down by 4.4% per year on average. And then he leaves the White House, and President Obama comes along. Market's up about 16%. And then one president for one term, President Trump, market goes up by 15.2% per year. So when you look at the numbers, is it obvious that having a Republican or a Democrat in the White House is better or worse for the markets? Is it? I've asked this question in conservative states, liberal states. Nobody can tell me it's obvious. It's not obvious at all. But then leads to an even more important question. Should you even assign credit or blame for how the market did? Because you look at George W. Bush, and you might say, well, he was not a good president for the markets. In fact, he cut taxes to dividends to long-term gains. He was very business-friendly, and yet the market dropped by 4%. What's going on? Well, he walked in the White House just as the dot-com was going bust. How much did he have to do with the dot-com bust? Nothing. 9/11 happened 9 months into his term, and he walked off at the bottom of the GFC. So why should we blame him? And on the other hand, President Clinton, God bless him, he walked in just as dot-com was taken off, something that he had nothing to do with. I know Al Gore tried to say we invented the internet, but the reality is that the White House had not much to do with Amazon and Pets.com and all the companies that were flying high in the 90s. So it's not fair to give him credit the same way it's not fair to blame George W. Bush. But what about policies? And you mentioned Reagan. Reagan was really well known for the business-friendly policies and the tax cuts and everything that he did to stimulate the economy. And the markets did really well, 15.8%. What's also interesting is that people are saying, if we have a president that is not business-friendly and is not paying attention to the market, it's going to be bad. And one that sticks to mind is, by the way, it's a little story. My son, years ago, dated one of my friend's daughter, and it was a 2-hour drive. So we used to drive through Central California, which is all farmland. And you drive, and there are all these signs hanging on barns and everything, say no to socialism. And I think what they reflected on was that President Obama was in the White House, and he was much more focused on health care, for example, at the time. And by the way, these are the same farmers who are just buying water at incredibly subsidized prices by the government, but let's say no to socialism to others. That's the side. But the point is that you have a president that is not focused on business but has social programs as a priority. What would be your feel as an investor? How bad can the market get when you have a president that's not really honed in on business and the market? doesn't seem like a good idea to be invested in the market. And there are plenty of U.S. investors who said, when Obama got elected, that I need to sell everything, move to Canada, and I'll be happy over there. It turns out during the 8 years that President Obama was in office, the market went up by about 16% per year. What's the difference between a president focused on business and tax cuts versus one that's focused on healthcare? Is there a difference? But that's not what you hear in the media. That's not what the emotions are telling you. And you got to be careful because the numbers don't seem to indicate that even the priorities of the president matter. But it's not just electing the president. There's also a Congress at play. And in 2021, there was an election in Georgia, the state of Georgia, and the two Democratic senators won their races. And at that point, the Democrats controlled the White House, the Senate, and the House at the same time. And in my mind back then, it became like a natural experiment. What if you look at times when one party completely controls the agenda in Washington, the White House, the Senate, and the House, and you compare the results of the market when one party dominates versus when the other one does? Would you say that's a pretty logical way to assess the impact of politics and one party? Because if you're having a president that's Republican and the Congress is Democratic, then it's not easy to figure out what it is. You're splitting hairs, and I don't have any. So I just wanted to kind of like make it more conclusive. So I actually looked at exactly that. Over the 90 years of data that we have, it turns out that the Republicans had control of Washington with the White House, the Senate, and the White House for 13 years. And in the 13 years that they controlled everything in D.C., the market's a simple average, which is mathematically is different than the annualized return, but we'll come back to that. On average, the market went up by 14.52%, which is a nice growth in the market. Now, the question is, did the Democrats also have that unified government control? The answer is absolutely they had it. And in fact, it wasn't for 13 years. It was quite a lot longer. It was 34 years. So if you're to guess, which party do you think did better and by how much? What do you think? I'm sorry? By how much? So I hear Democrats by... By the way, this is a very sensitive number because when I first showed this, I was being very careful that, listen, I don't want anybody to think that I'm making them feel good or bad about their political views, and I had to be really careful of that because I'm not here to promote one policy, one party, and that's not my job. But because of that, I actually went to the PhDs in the research group to run the numbers, make sure that I didn't get it wrong. Well, it turns out that when you run the numbers, during the 34 years of the Democratic unified government control, the market on average went up by 14.52%. It is identical to the second decimal. So when people are telling you that the Republicans or Democrats are better or worse for the markets, when they're telling you that one president is better or worse, when they're telling you that, what does the data suggest? Is there anything to it? No, it's all emotions talking. It's all the media feeding those emotions. When you look at the numbers, folks, I can tell you there's absolutely no reason for anyone to make a move with your money because of politics. And it's not that politics don't matter. Of course they matter. And the way I thought about it is, again, in an analogy, I was baking some cookies with my daughter. I don't know if anybody bakes cookies with kids or these days anymore. And I put in the butter and the flour and the sugar and the eggs, and you mix it all in, you pop it in the oven. When the cookie is baked and you tear that apart, you can't really point and say, aha, I can see the egg yolk in there. No, you can't. It's mixed in with so many ingredients that it's just not visible to you anymore. And to me, politics is a little bit like the egg yolk in a cookie, but it's not the garlic in a cookie. It doesn't make it stink so badly that you recognize it. No, it's just something that is one of the many, many, many variables that impact the market, but it's not a primary one. And because of that, you got to be so cautious that don't let emotions, don't let that heart that Chris is talking about dominate your decisions. Look at the numbers. They're not telling you to make a move because of politics and elections. But to kind of wrap it up, come back to this idea, is it different this time? Is this election different? I would say that the election itself, it's different because, I mean, actually, in a way, this is the one thing that's not different. We had exactly this contest before. These folks, whoever comes there in the White House, they've been there already, so it's not like brand new. But is it different this time, and, how to think about it?